Hey, Steve Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. Lots to touch on this week. We've got an update from the federal government, provincial government, and municipal governments. Huge changes coming on the housing supply front. I want to unpack all these policies because they are significant. And so I'm going to unpack all these. So again, if you're really into the real estate stuff, this is going to go deep on that topic. Now, first and foremost, for those of you that have been following this channel, you know how I probably feel about the federal government. I haven't been their biggest proponent. Because I find that as we're seeing in these policy changes just this week, is it takes an immense amount of political pressure to get these guys to actually do something. And so we've seen over the last couple months, the polling numbers from the Liberal government have been disastrous. And so now all of a sudden they're coming out and saying, oh yeah, maybe there is an immigration problem. Maybe we do need to add in more housing supply. And so you remember, for example, we talked about the foreign buyers. I think people in Canada bringing up some of those issues in 2015, right? 8 years later, we got a foreign buyer ban that commenced January 1st, 2023. So it took them 8 years. At first it was like, hey, you're xenophobic. And okay, foreign buyer ban 8 years later. Same thing that's happened on this policy. The Liberal government campaigned on removing GST on purpose-built rental units 8 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, polling numbers don't look so great. All of a sudden, they've removed the GST 8 years later. But nonetheless, it finally got done. It's a significant change. And so let me just unpack this for you. This is on new construction that's about to be built starting today. Is about to be built. They're going to remove GST on rental-only units. So again, not if you're building a condo building to resell it to end users, doesn't apply. If you already own a rental apartment building, doesn't apply. It's basically designed to get new construction off the ground. And this is at a very particular point in time, as we've talked about on this channel for the last 3, 4, 5 months, is that you're going to have a massive supply crunch as developers' cost of funding, cost of capital has more than doubled, making these projects no longer financially viable. So the government is saying, listen, well, how about we give you a break on the GST, 5% savings? Will this help create or get some of these projects that were being shelved back off the sidelines and back into the pipeline? And I will say unequivocally yes, because I'm in the industry. I talk to these developers. I actually just built a 4-unit rental building in Calgary that, unfortunately for my timing, would have been exempt, would have saved me about $40,000 had I waited for this program. I'll walk you through some of those numbers, but this is significant. This is a significant change for a developer. If they can have essentially a 5% savings, it helps offset some of the issues that they're seeing with obviously the rising cost of construction financing, and the cost of materials and labor is still incredibly elevated. So it will help a lot of projects get off. Now, again, we can talk about supply and demand. I know there's these weird voices out there that say, oh, it's not a supply issue. There's all these empty towers. It's just people that are not well informed or actually in the market. There is an element of speculation in Canada everybody's well aware of. The resale market, the pre-sale market for that matter, can have speculation. And that's what we're seeing in the prices, right? Home prices can go up on speculative reasons for low interest rates, cheap and available mortgage credit, an element of FOMO driving house prices up. So you can speculate and push prices up. Where you can't speculate is in the rental market. Setting market rents is a function of supply and demand. You can't borrow money to speculate on rents and pay your rent. Rents are a function of supply and demand. That's why in Canada, as of August, rents were up 9.6% year over year, which is an all-time record high, despite our neighbors to the south in the U.S., rents are up 0.5%. They're about to go negative next month. Rents are dropping in many major metros across the U.S. because they've been building like crazy over in the U.S. and they don't obviously have this insane population growth that is plaguing Canadian housing markets. And so you need to get more rental housing onto the market. That is without a doubt. Now, take a look at this chart. We've been building rental housing. Wow, it's really taken off over the last 4 or 5 years. Why is that? Well, you can see through a lot of regulation and policy and tax changes over the last couple of decades, they stopped building rental housing, right? We built a lot of it in the 70s, and then we stopped building it. And there's a multitude of reasons for it. It basically came down to tax code changes, where developers then shifted to condominium pre-sales. And so they've now exploded back up in the last 5-6 years. And why is that? I can tell you it's because of one program in particular, CMHC's rental financing program for developers of rental construction is so favorable and so cheap that it's incentivized developers to build rental housing. So, for example, you can get up to a 50-year amortization. You can get 10-year fixed-term debt, and the debt is cheaper than any market rate you're going to find at any big bank. So this is why developers have been building rental housing. And I would argue that given where rents are today, keep adding it. If you want more affordable housing, keep adding more rental housing supply. And this is exactly what this removal of the GST is going to do. It's going to basically save these developers about 5%. So I'll give you an example on my own project in Calgary. I took an old single-family house. I tore it down. I built 4 legal units. I built a 4-plex. Let's just keep the numbers simple. These aren't the exact numbers, but for all intents and purposes, let's say Let's say I bought the land for $600,000 and I built the house, the 4-plex, for $1 million. So 1.6 was my all-in cost. So on the $1 million worth of construction, right, I had to pay all these tradespeople. I had to pay for all the materials, tiling, roof shingles, etc. So on that $1 million of supply and labor, I would have paid GST. So I initially pay the GST, and then I go and ask for a refund from the government called an input tax credit, an ITC. And so what happens is they say, well, yeah, you pay GST. If you're going to build a rental unit, you get that GST back as a rebate check. Now, at the end of the project, the government says, oh, you're not selling these units, you're keeping them as rental. Well, we want to charge you GST on the fair market value. So let's just say the project is done, it's worth $1.6 million. I have to pay 5% on $1.6 million. Why? Because they say, well, you're not selling these units, so we're not going to be able to collect GST off of the units. Your rental checks, you don't charge GST, so we're going to ask you to pay GST right now, up front. We want to charge you. So, $1.6 million at 5%, that's $80,000. Why? I'm just trying to bring, rental product to market. And so what you can do is you then take that $80,000, you minus it off of the input tax credits, which is the GST that you've received, that you received back, basically, after paying off all your trades. And so, at the end of the day, you end up owing it essentially an extra, call it 40 some odd thousand, basically, is how it worked out too. So there's going to be a huge cost saving to developers. Net, there's going to basically be no GST. So any GST that you've paid to trades, materials, that's all basically waived at the end of the day. And again, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a huge savings to these developers. I know for a fact, because I've looked at some of these pro formas, where I'm like, ooh, those are razor tight. I wouldn't invest them. I know that this change is going to move some of those projects off of the sidelines, and so it's a much needed pro-cyclical change to hopefully offset what I think is still coming, is still a steep drop off in housing construction. Because while this is going to help, you still can't defy the laws of economic gravity, which is interest rates, cost of capital, investors. The housing slowdown is underway, and it's going to continue even with this. But this is going to help stem some of the bleeding on that side. Now, there's also a big change we're seeing on the municipal levels where we just saw it in the city of Vancouver. They just approved a new mass rezoning of single family homes. So the city of Vancouver has most of their residential land is zoned single family, which is insane in a city where a tear down lot is $2 million. That the most of the city is actually zoned for that product. And so the city has just said, okay, anything that was zoned RS, which is like a good chunk of all the residential zoning, RS single family, you can now build multiplex on those homes. So on a standard size lot in Vancouver, which is 4,000 square feet, we're going to increase the density from 0.6 for a single family house or 0.7 for a duplex. We're going to increase that to 1.0 FSR, floor space ratio. So you can build 1.0. So you basically, simple terms, you can build 4,000 square feet on a 4,000 square foot lot. So they're giving you more density if you build a minimum of 3 units. You have to build a minimum of 3 units. You can build up to 4 on that standard lot. So again, you could technically have 4 units. All units are 1,000 square feet. There's your multiplex done. And there's really almost no additional cost for that density. And the timelines for permitting it, I can tell you, is going to be much, much quicker. So this is huge. And again, on some of these bigger lots in Vancouver, so if you get up to a 6,000 square foot lot, there's not a lot of those, but if you get up to a 6,000 square foot lot, you can build up to 6 homes if you're going to resell them. And if you decide to go rental, you can get up to 8 units on a standard single family 6,000 square foot lot. So I can tell you my personal opinion, I think we're actually going to see a decent uptake on this program. I think it's coming much, much needed because I think we're still going to be talking about housing affordability 5-6 years from now, that this is a much needed program. And so the city of Vancouver, that's a huge change for them. I think you're going to see most of this development coming on the east side. Now, again, this is for new construction, right? You can't take an old house and start chopping it up into 4 units and saying, give me my density bonus. It's no. You're taking an old single-family house that's 85 years old, that's at the end of its service life. You're knocking it down, and you're building 3 or 4 units onto this lot. And in some cases, if the lot size is larger, you're going to get more density and build 5 units, 6 units, up to 8 if you're rental. So that's a huge change in the city. So you've got the federal government trying to encourage the supply side finally. You've got the city of Vancouver trying to encourage the supply side. Calgary has a big meeting coming up in early October to basically change a lot of the single-family zoning to townhouse zoning. And interestingly enough, the housing minister, Sean Fraser, who was previously the immigration minister, we've talked about him a lot on the show, he penned a note to the mayor of Calgary saying, listen, if you want to tap into our housing accelerator fund, which is basically free government money, you will not get that money unless you approve your proposed changes, which is to basically allow a lot more townhouse zoning in inner city single family neighborhoods. So it seems to me, again, as much as I love to rag on these governments, I really think we may be at a turning point. I think there's a lot of things to work on. This isn't going to make housing more affordable in the next year or the next 2 years, but it's a steady progress into, I think, what could alleviate a lot of things. And again, CMHC puts out a report, you got to build 3.5 million homes by 2030. Ain't going to happen. We're never going to get close to 3.5 million homes. But hopefully by aggressively letting the free market, incentivizing them, not taxing housing development and taxing housing in general like it's cigarettes. 30% of the cost of a new home in the GTA, for example, is just government taxes. So getting away from taxing housing like cigarettes will slowly allow the free market to get out there to build and to slow the pace of future home price appreciation, to slow the pace of future rent growth. Again, I just gave you a brilliant example of what's happening in the U.S. Why are our rents 10% higher growth rate than the US. I mean, it should be really simple, but again, too much immigration, not enough home building to take up. Now, I still think the government, in their infinite wisdom, needs to tackle the immigration side, the manipulation and the taking advantage of these foreign students from these private colleges is totally egregious. And it's a loophole that's being taken advantage of, and it needs to be shut down, because if you bring in 1.2 million people a year, I don't care how much GST you take off, it's just really hard to build enough for that housing, because we are still limited by the number of trades and skilled labor that we have to actually go out and build these homes. So I would argue they need to start looking at fast tracking skilled labor. We know that the immigration side on skilled labor has actually been declining for the last 7 or 8 years. So while we bring in 1.2 million people, they're not actually bringing in a lot of tradespeople. The percentage of the immigration growth that is going into the construction and the trades industry has actually been on a steady decline. So again, something for policymakers to look at and hopefully reverse. But again, some very, very big changes. I don't think it changes the macro over the next 12 to 18 months. Interest rates at 6%, mortgage rates at 6.2, 6.5. It breaks a lot of things, and there's still gonna be, so the interest rates are still front and center. They are going to drive the bus over the next 12 to 18 months, the sort of the near term. But I think we're setting the groundwork that when things stabilize, that we can get to work and hopefully fix this housing crisis that isn't going to get fixed in 2 or 3 years. It's a decade, minimum a decade, to get out of this mess. So again, some very, very positive changes from the government. You'll very, very rarely hear me say that. I think they screw up most things, but they finally have come around after 8 years and some bad polling numbers to make the appropriate changes. In the city of Vancouver, of course, with their new mayor, some good, much needed changes. So as always, hope to help. We'll see you next week.